Well, today I'm very excited. I have a very special guest, and it's Millie Devine. Some people know her as Millie. Millie is an icon, I think, in New London County, and has lived here most of her life. She did a stint up in the Boston area for a while, but she has just written a book, and so we're excited. The name of the book is Sunrise, Sunset, Millie's Divine Journey, autobiography by Mildred E. Devine. And all of the proceeds for her book is going to go for Safe Futures, which is such a worthy nonprofit that's located here in New London. So today my guest is Millie Devine. Millie, thank you so much for coming and being on my show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my goodness, yes. And I just finished reading your book a day or so ago, and I took a lot of notes. So one of my favorite quotes from your book is, "Let me live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend to mankind." Can you tell me what that means to you, Millie?
Oh, it means the world to me. My mom and her sisters all lived by that motto, and they were living examples of reaching out to others. Whenever they saw a need, they tried to fill it and to be of service.
Okay.
And I've followed in their footsteps.
So it's kind of like JFK, John F. Kennedy, ask not what you can do for your country, or not ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That same kind of
Yeah, it is.
thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yes.
Beautiful. And also, Eleanor Roosevelt was one of your favorites. And
Yep.
What is your favorite quote of hers, if there's one in particular that strikes you?
I usually have it right off the tip of my tongue. And
Well, tell me something about Eleanor that you admire, that you think of when you think of Eleanor Roosevelt. Why is she a stalwart hero or example of somebody that we should, especially perhaps women, I think women can look up to her. I think we need heroes. I think we need role models. I think especially right now in our society and today.
Absolutely. I remember that, it's coming to me, what her quote was, because I remember it saying that you don't have to ask for consent.
Nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission
consent.
Or without your
Without
consent.
your consent,
Right,
that's it.
right.
That's
Which
it.
is so true.
It is, absolutely. And I think it's so true today. Besides, I mean, look at what the military's going through with the women who've been abused. And not having the support system, and you can kind of see both sides of the whole thing, but it's still a very difficult situation.
Well, we live in a patriarchal society. We just have to admit that.
Yes, we
But
do.
you are a lady of perseverance and determination, if you don't mind my saying so, because you worked in a male industry, primarily a male business, right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Banking, and it was very, very interesting, because I started at the bank when I was 23 years old as a secretary in the trust and estate department, and worked my way up, which was not always easy to work up in those days, because I joined in 1965. So, things were very different back then. And yes, it's very much a male-dominated world. And there
How many female colleagues did you have at that point that...
As far as secretaries were concerned, between the ones that were like out on the front platform of the branch and everything, bank-wide, I really don't know how many, but there were a lot of us that were at entry-level positions. In the trust department, there were 4 secretaries and 4 bosses. So it was a one-on-one relationship. And I was hired to be assistant to assist one of them as his secretary. And had a wonderful, wonderful boss. he scared the daylights out of me when I first joined the bank.
You wrote about that in your
Yes.
book. I don't remember his name.
Clark Mosley.
Clark, right.
And
Clark.
he became such a mentor to me through my whole banking career.
But you had to prove yourself to him, if I remember within the text
yes,
of your
yes,
book.
I
It
did.
wasn't just
I did.
an
No.
immediate
No.
tandem bike ride that you took off together.
I earned
It kind of
the
had to
recognition.
come to a understanding.
It did. And I love the story how we really ended up breaking the ice because we found some mice in a state that we were selling.
That's right.
Yeah, and I basically was getting very close to uncovering them. And he came in, uncovered them. But before he did, he saw me at the door. And we were doing this, the trust and estate business is a very personalized business. And if there's no family left to clean out the house and do all this, the trust officers and their assistants
That's what you do.
do.
Right.
And so you don dungarees and old clothes, anything that's washable or disposable, and go into homes and heave.
Take
start
care of
heaving
it.
away.
Right, right.
So I was busy tossing things over in the corner, and as I did so, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye move in the box.
Good peripheral vision then.
Oh, yes. So the next time I went to remove something, I was very cautious, putting my fingers in very carefully. But I didn't look where I was tossing. I looked at the box to see if anything moved. I didn't see anything move. I said, "Oh, well, don't let your imagination run away with yourself." And all this
How old
business.
were you at the time?
23, 24.
Oh, so you're still pretty young. You're just
Oh, yes, this
fresh
is
out of
new
late-
experience.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
the first estate that I was
Sure.
directly involved in.
Sure, okay.
And so this was a whole learning experience for me.
Of course.
And there were antiques galore.
So
was
it's beautifully furnished, yes.
huge house. It was a single lady who lived there, but her family had owned it before. It was originally their summer cottage, if you will. But it was 3 stories of living quarters and 3 stories of servants' quarters. So it was a huge,
kind of palatial, it sounds, yes.
exactly. And then all the lawn, they went right down to Long Island Sound.
Oh.
And it was absolutely gorgeous.
Pristine.
So anyhow, back in those days, they did not have lights in closets. And I was working on her bedroom and her closet. Well, opened the door and looked in, and okay, the shelves had a lot of stuff on them. So, okay, I could take care of all that.
Sure.
And then the floor had boxes of stuff. Believe me, when you're in the trust business, you learn you're not a saver. You get rid of stuff along the way. As I said, it was a real education. And so Mr. Mosley, as we called him at that time, was the secretary, you called him Mr. Mosley. And he came to the door and, "Well, how's everything going in here, Millie?" I said, "Oh, fine, Mr. Mosley, but I think there might be a mouse or something in this box." "Take it out," he said. I said, "Not me, you." So he came over. Fortunately, he did not go macho on me.
Yeah, yeah.
He came over, looked in the box, lifted out the next items that were to be removed, and sure, there was Mama nursing all her babies. What did he do? Very caring individual. Picked up the box, carried it downstairs, set it outside the door, outside. By the time we went for lunch, the mice were all gone. We could pick up the box, bring it back in, and finish doing what we need to do.
Oh, he knew how to handle it.
Absolutely. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, you showed yourself to be somewhat vulnerable to him, and he respected that. And
Well, he had a son and a daughter, and so he could feature his daughter being in a similar situation,
sure,
I'm sure.
Of course.
But anyhow.
Well, and you want that for your young women, to have a boss who would be like that, who would look out for her or his
Yes.
best interest.
Yes, exactly.
And
it was just interesting working with him because I had to have a heart-to-heart talk with him at one point. I actually had an offer from another job about a year after I joined the bank, and it was with a law firm. And I was torn because I knew you had education, you had other things available through the bank that you probably wouldn't have available in the law firm. But all I was doing was everybody's filing and their, the dirty work, the things they didn't want to do.
Secretarial work, right?
No, it was even
filing.
and everything that they didn't want to do. I mean, the routine secretarial they were taking care of, but not the nitty gritty of typing stencils, back in those days, we didn't have photocopy machines. If you did, it was a
Oh,
liquid
the old
process.
mimeographs.
Absolutely.
We
So
did
I
those
had to
in the
type
schools, yes.
verbatim wills and trust agreements onto stencils that would then be taken to the workroom downstairs where we had this humongous mimeo
You had
machine.
to roll it.
Yes, and we had a man who did all that along with, he was handling the mail room and all this kind of thing. But I had to get the information on the stencils and make sure that if it was an error in the will, you know, like a missing comma or, you know, anything misspelling, whatever, you type it verbatim, exactly the way it is there.
Oh, really? You don't do the correction?
No. Don't want to change a thing. So this was my job, was to type it all on these stencils and then give the stencils to him, and he would run them off the copies and however many we needed and all that. But
so that was your start.
that was my start.
Yes.
Oh, and also, when you're reading the book, obviously I was very much involved in the Palmer and Bodenwine foundations that are so instrumental in our community.
Well, we have a couple, right?
Yes.
Foundations.
Yep.
That
Frank
are...
Loomis Palmer Fund and Bodenwine Public Benevolent Foundation. And I ended up, as I came up through the ranks, of actually administering those two foundations for about 10 years.
Which is really amazing.
It is. But how did I start? I had to post on 3x5 index cards the grants that we made from each of the foundations, so we could keep track of it. We didn't have computers. We didn't have, you know, sophisticated systems for record keeping and all that. So you just posted it to 3x5 cards and kept your files. And
well, I think it's really an important lesson for young people to hear stories like this, because everyone thinks they want to be the executive director, they want to be the CEO, the CFO, whatever, you know, somebody at the top, upper tier of whatever organization there might be. And what you're telling me is it took little baby steps, sometimes humiliating experiences like finding the mouse or the mice and finding a new home for them, and slowly generating that trust and that respect and that tenacity that you develop and showing people that's how you get there.
Exactly. And you're not afraid to speak up.
Tell me about that.
You know, just like I asked Mr. Mosley if we could meet, you know, in private. And he said, yes, go ahead into the library, which doubled as a conference room, and I'll join you there shortly. And he came in, and I told him about having this offer of this other job with the law firm and everything else. And I said, I know what the bank can offer me. But I said, I'm afraid I'm losing my secretarial skills.
And that's honest.
Because I'm not using them.
Right.
You lose what you don't use.
And you need to continue to grow as in your career.
Absolutely. And so he said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you decide, I mean, he listened. He was very helpful and everything else. He wasn't trying to persuade me to stay at the bank. But he said, if you decide to stay, then I will see that you get a chance to use your secretarial skills. And that he did.
And that was a promise, and he kept his promise.
He kept his promise. When his secretary was going on, at the time in banking, you had to take 2 consecutive weeks because the auditors had to have time to go in and make sure nobody was embezzling or you know, anything of this sort. So
are those checks and balance systems still in place?
They are still in place, but you know, because of computers and all that kind of thing, they're not in the same way. So you don't have to, you can now go off for a week or, you know, take a few days.
And there's external audits and there's different monitoring systems.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So anyhow, let's see, where was I going?
Well, you were talking about how he was 2 weeks and he promised you that he would continue to advance your skills and position within the banking industry.
Exactly. His secretary went on vacation for 2 weeks. And so he had me fill in for her. So I was taking dictation from him. I was using my, you know, stethoscope. I was, you know, stethoscope. That's right. Whatever. Stenography. But anyhow, typing up whatever he needed to have for his signature. And of course, you always had to make copies of things. You didn't have all the photocopy equipment and all this business. So yes, so it was very detailed work. If he needed a file while she was on vacation and the file room was downstairs, I was downstairs in a flash and back up at my desk and had the file on his desk and just, I was there.
So after 2 weeks, he saw that you could perform at a very high level and you met his expectations, if not exceeded them, right?
Exactly.
So then what happened?
And so then I had to end up filling in for the other secretaries as well with their bosses.
So they're all like, wow, this Millie.
Yeah, well, this went on for about 4 years. We had a one-woman trust officer, 3 male trust officers in the department, 4 female secretaries. And so, unfortunately, the female officer developed breast cancer. And she was hospitalized and all this. But before she'd encouraged me to, when you have a chance, begin reading the history files of our accounts.
Oh,
and
interesting.
familiarizing yourself with because I'd had a brief conversation with her about, like, how did you get where you are?
Right. So you read the histories of different people and the people who have their trust funds.
Exactly. So
with
you begin to understand
the whys of the people.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
And why they've invested and why their money should be appropriated in certain
and directions and what was going on.
Okay.
So I did do that, and then when she was diagnosed with the cancer, I got even more involved in what, not really officially picking up for her, but doing a lot more of learning.
Sure.
And so...
Well, what great advice, though, because if you understand the why of somebody, then you really understand their integrity and their purpose.
And I went into the trust and estate business not understanding it at all, not knowing it. I hadn't grown up with trust funds and all that business. And so, yes, it was a wonderful opportunity to learn and to have typed up the wills and trust. I learned from reading those documents too, because you're reading as well as you're, typing and you're absorbing, kind of thing.
So, who was this woman? What was her name?
Ann Cummings.
Ann Cummings.
Yes,
so
she was from Norwich originally, and she had come up through the ranks and from a secretary and had become a trust officer.
So what a wonderful mentor, though, for you.
She was. And when we lost her, I was promoted into her position as administrative assistant. And it was just kept growing from there, and I got to interact with her clients and all this. Of course, her secretary became my secretary.
How'd that go?
A
little rough.
And interesting, very interesting.
Some patches,
I learned from
course.
that. I always tried to learn not only from my own mistakes, and yes, I made my own mistakes along the way, but from others and what they were doing and things. And I tried to bring her along. But she was kind of set in her ways and like, who was this young upstart? And, a little bit of an attitude.
It's hard to supervise people who are older than you, I think, for one thing, too.
Yes.
But sometimes you're placed in those situations.
Absolutely. And by then, I must have been about 27,
So you're still pretty young.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And she had a family and all of that. So it was very interesting to come up. And then while I was doing that, there was a young man who had been hired to learn the trust and investment business as well. And he had his Cornell degree. And he was very impressed with that degree. He'd grown up on a farm. Of course he'd be impressed by the degree. And then he'd go off to Cornell and all of that. But he was constantly throwing in my face that he had his degree from Cornell, and I didn't have one.
Well, it is a fine university, but that's not necessarily what gets the job done when you're in the work situation.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I remember one day, it was a beautiful spring day, and by then we had both been made administrative assistants, and on the same day we were both made administrative assistants. And it was a gorgeous spring day, and I said, "Oh, it's such a beautiful day. What a nice day to get out and make customer calls." He said, "Fred and I will go out and make the calls. You stay in the office. You're a low man on the totem pole."
And you'd both been hired at the same time?
Yes.
And he thought that because you didn't have your college degree yet at that point in time? Okay, so you went back to college, you went back to university, and you got your degree.
Exactly, yes. So he did me a huge favor.
There you go.
He got my Irish up, and I went after it. And I went to Upper Iowa University, where I did independent study, and only had to spend 3 weeks completing their residency requirement at that time on campus.
In Iowa.
In Iowa. Fayette, Iowa, in the month of January.
Yeah, I know. I'm from Nebraska, so I grew up in Omaha, and I was born up in Minnesota, so I know what the Midwest winters are like.
Yep.
If people complain here, they really don't know what they're complaining about.
I had never experienced the equivalent of 60 below zero.
It's cold. It's cold. I can tell you, it's cold. So you were there for 3 weeks in January, and where is that town in the state of Iowa?
Fayette.
Where is that in Iowa?
I remember that we had
Des Moines or
we had to fly into. I remember going through Moline, and then it was a drive up to the campus.
Okay, I'm not sure where Moline is. I mean, sometimes you fly into Omaha to get to places. In
right.
Iowa. Sometimes you fly into Des Moines. So
yeah, we did fly to Iowa. I can't remember. I mean, this was so long ago now.
Yeah.
But anyhow, yes.
It is cold, and you do feel it. But
absolutely.
you said the people were friendly.
They were very friendly. In fact, the first Sunday that we were there, the dean offered us students, Catholic, rides to Mass. Wonderful. So found out where the church was. We went to Mass, got the ride back, and everything was fine. The following Sunday, there was no such offer. So Little Miss Independent decided to walk to church about a mile away.
It's cold. Yeah.
It wasn't the equivalent of 65 below at that point, but it was below zero.
Sure.
And it was cold. And talk about friendly people in Iowa. One couple saw me walking when I had almost reached the church and said, So when I came into the church, they said, "Are you by any chance a student over at the university?" "Yes, I am." And with this cold weather, you really shouldn't be walking. And would you like a ride back to campus?
Oh, I'm glad they did that for you.
And I said, that would be, because I didn't know them at all, but they were being very gracious and everything else. And I said, that would be very nice. I would appreciate it. My nose, my ears were all bright red.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how to dress for that kind of cold kind of thing. We don't get it that cold here.
No.
Because who knows what's going to happen with global warming.
Oh, there you go. Well, we don't know about that.
Yep.
So you've already described what it's like to work in a male-dominated society a little bit. Is there any more on that topic that you'd like to elaborate on? Sure.
Let's advance now from mid-70s, in the 70s, I had a boss who belonged to the Thames Club, a male-only social club.
Oh, sure.
That was across the street from the bank. I'm not picking on the Thames Club.
No, of course not.
It's a wonderful club.
Well,
but that's the way clubs were around the world. Male-dominated, and they didn't accept women members and all of this. So anyhow, I was applying for this. My boss, not Mr. Mosley, but another boss along the way. This is about 20 years later in my career. And so my boss left and moved to Florida to work for another bank down there. And so they made me the acting manager for the entire region of eastern Connecticut, so the eastern third of the state. So I put in my resume and an application for the position.
Of course. You were
I figured,
qualified.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been here all that time. I learned a lot, and I'd proven myself and all this. And so things were, going along. The bank decided not only to do a national search, but also to interview the community to see if it was ready for a woman in that position. So the club almost kept me from getting the position. And then when I did get the position, which I did, it took the club 5 years before they opened to women. So I had a special permission to go in and attend client meetings. They were members, and they were used to having their monthly or their quarterly investment and trust meetings there with their trust officer and investment officer present. So I had to attend those meetings.
Well, that's a whole story in itself,
It
because
is.
there's a lot that probably went on there that people didn't really want to know about, and you had to go in a back door kind of thing.
Well, I didn't, at the Thames Club, fortunately, they let me come in the front door, hang my coat up in the coat room, go up the massive staircase to the conference room, which, lucky for me, was next to the ladies' room. So those were the restrictions I had. And then 5 years later, I became the first paying woman member.
Well,
of the club.
congratulations.
So it was.
I think there's a spiral staircase. They could have had you go up the back if they wanted to. Like
the Thames Club was very nice. I'd been to other clubs where if you were allowed to even go in the main door with the man, he could not take your coat and hang it with his. You had to go hang yours in the ladies' room.
Well, Virginia Slims, we've come a long way, baby, right?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
you know, we just have a few minutes left. Our time has gone by so fast I can't even believe it. So some of the nonprofits that you've been involved with, Millie, are Big Brothers Big Sisters,
Yes.
Child and Family, Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, and the New London Meal Center. Why nonprofits? Why all this work in the nonprofit world? Tell me why you do that.
First of all, at the bank at the time, and this goes back to days of Hartford National and its successors up until Fleet came in, and then everything changed. But part of your job description was to be involved in the community.
Sure.
And so, yes, if you needed to take time from work to go to a meeting or something of that sort, fine, as long as you got your work done, they weren't concerned.
Well, and I think you have to start that. You build that capacity from a very young age.
That's
I'm on the
right.
board of education in East Lyme, and on the board, one of the pillars of our graduate is that they're involved with the community, doing community service, and building relationships. Not just doing like one and done, like I showed up for a flea market or
Exactly.
something like that. But
Exactly, yes. So it's hands-on and just getting involved. And so that goes back to my mother's, the motto that my mother and her sisters lived by. Let me live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend to mankind. They were always there. If they saw a need, they were ready to fill it. I followed in their footsteps and wanted to do the same thing.
I think you would have done it regardless, but yeah. And I love what one of your counselors said to you at one point in your book, replace a sad memory with a happy one. How do you do that?
Oh, yes. That was after I lost my sister. And that was an interesting story, too. The details are in the book. But I was serving on the board of Lawrence Memorial Hospital at the time and got called out of that meeting by the president of the hospital, who had gotten a call and learned of what had happened. My sister had dropped dead on our front lawn, mowing the front lawn, which was the same way my dad went back in '71. And so I was like reliving both at the same time because they were just so similar.
Of course.
I don't mow my own front lawn. But it was during that time, oh dear, I'm getting, refresh my memory.
Well, that you have replaced a sad memory with a happy memory.
Yes, yes. So when I identified my sister, yes, she was deceased. And I couldn't get that vision of seeing her in the hospital just laying there lifeless.
Right.
Out of my head.
Right.
And it kept just bugging me. So when I went to work with a counselor, I asked her, and she said, each time, think of a pleasant scene with her.
When you were laughing, having fun, playing
exactly.
games.
And so we were in the process of creating a Red Hat Society. And my sister had bought a red hat, which was, that's all in the book as well. So anyhow, it was just, that was what I saw. There was an image that came to my mind, and it still comes to my mind this day, how she grabbed that red hat and put it on to show a couple of the ladies that were visiting with us and she just, with flourish, it was like Frosty the Snowman coming to life. And my sister came to life, and almost a Rosalind Russell.
Well, and we all have tragedies in our life, and
Absolutely.
I think knowing how to deal with those tragedies is really important. And Sunrise, Sunset, all of the proceeds for your book are going for
Safe Futures.
Safe Futures, which is such a noteworthy and noble cause. I think I would buy the book. I would recommend other people buy the book. And how can we get it, Millie? How do we get a hold of it?
It's available on Amazon.com and also locally. through Title IX bookstore on State Street next to the Guard Art Center, and at Studio 33 on Bank Street in New London.
Well, thank you for discussing your book and sharing your life with
Love
us.
it.
And I think, we could talk about how to write your own book. And there's so many other conversations we could have. So thank you
Absolutely.
again for the opportunity to meet with you again today.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you.